It has been said in the past that the most exciting part of any champion's career is the bouts that they take during their original ascent towards their eventual shot at the belt itself. In that time, doubts are voiced, questions are asked, and when push comes to shove, if you're not up to scratch, you will be found out, sometimes with devastating consequences. And while we do love the meteoric rises that lead to a run of dominance in the vein of a John Jones or a Khabib Nurmagomedov, there is something quite special about a fighter who can turn our expectations on their head and find a way to turn their entire career around. Guys like Michael Bisping, Rafael dos Anjos, Robbie Lawler, fighters who many had already seen enough from by the time they found that extra gear. Fighters who most of us had written off or categorized as mid-tier or gatekeepers. But the sporting world is one that throws up curveballs when you least expect it, and when you're dealing with the heart of a true fighter, determination and self-belief can show you the path towards a potential that absolutely no one except yourself could ever have believed in. Jorge Masvidal is in the middle of proving himself to be capable of such a feat. A late career resurgence, dubbed by him as the Resurrection, has allowed him to carve out a new level of fame, respect, and athletic ability for himself, making for one of the most impressive rebranding efforts the sport has ever known. To those who aren't familiar with Masvidal's background, Jorge was seen by most as one of the most technically sound fighters in the sport, bringing beautiful boxing, excellent offense in the close quarters, and an overall gameness among other things, making him an incredibly tough night out for anyone. His 12-6 record inside the UFC is an incredibly misleading one, but also one that does a perfect job at explaining the crucial flaw within Jorge's game that he has done wonders in fixing in recent years, giving another level of credibility to this resurrection that we are experiencing. His 6 UFC losses have all come by way of decision, with 4 of them coming by split decision, and that was Jorge's label. The fighter who had all the talent and attributes necessary to become a champion, but one who lacked the ferocity and killer instinct needed to grab the fight by the scruff of its neck in those pivotal moments to either sway the judges or score the finish. After taking a lengthy hiatus from the sport after a decision loss to Stephen Wonderboy Thompson back in 2017, a hairier, slightly more buff version of Gamebred returned 18 months later, promising to show the world that even then, in his 46th career fight, he could make the switch necessary to make an almighty step in the right direction. This is Jorge Masvidal's resurrection in 5 pivotal performances. Cesar Ferreira. The first significant move made by Masvidal in rebranding himself came after his decision to forego what was a difficult cut down to 155 pounds in favour of a move to the welterweight division. Cesar Ferreira, a career middleweight and a somewhat surprising addition to the UFC welterweight roster, was seen as a fitting introduction for Jorge into the 170-pound division, one who would challenge him on a physical level, testing his suitability for his new home among the bigger men. And as you would expect, Jorge took to this new home with a level of calm and composure indicative of the type of fighter he had been for years, but after tipping the scales 15 pounds heavier than his usual fighting weight, we did begin to see a more deadly version of Gamebred in there, as he used some fantastic short hooks when breaking from the clinch and an excellent application of pressure to really turn up the heat on his opponent. When he did finally land one of those shots, it spelled doom for his adversary, leading to a first-round TKO victory and a successful start to the road towards his eventual late-career resurgence. Donald Cerrone. So many people overlooked Jorge when he was set to take on the surging welterweight contender Donald Cerrone back in 2016. Cowboy had truly found a vicious streak of form since leaving the lightweight division behind him in favour of a move to 170 pounds. And like Gamebred, he had found a level of ferocity in himself and ability to finish that very few thought that he could bring to the table so consistently. Cerrone was the one entering the fight with all of the heat, but Masvidal remained confident in the build-up, warning us all not to underestimate him or the road that he had travelled to get to the point where he then stood. Still carrying the label as a hugely talented fighter who lacked that extra gear, Masvidal surprised quite a few with the level of violence that he brought on the night itself as he walked Cowboy down before pretty much TKOing him twice, once at the very end of the first round and again at the beginning of the second. Masvidal was always a known and respected commodity amongst the MMA community, but this fight certainly stood as one major turning point for him and our perception of him. Darren Till. Matchups with a pair of the trickiest welterweights to ever lace up gloves in Demian Maia and Stephen Wonderboy Thompson saw Jorge's post-Cerrone momentum halted by a duo of decision losses. Both fights were competitive and neither defeat was devastating by any means, but nevertheless, Masvidal was left at something of a crossroads in his career. Outside of the top 5 of the division and at a pivotal point in his prime years, forced to make a very important choice about his future. 18 months later, Jorge would return at UFC London to face Darren Till in a matchup that in many ways, from a promotional perspective, was meant as a means for the Englishman Till to rebound from a brutal loss at the hands of then champion Tyron Woodley, in what was admittedly a premature title shot. Well, if that was how the story was supposed to go, nobody told Masvidal. It was a tightly contested matchup while it lasted, but as soon as Gamebred started to turn up the heat, he eventually found his mark and laid the gorilla out with one of the most brutal knockouts of the year. The resurrection was truly in swing, folks, and Jorge Masvidal had fully emerged as a credible knockout threat. Ben Askren. And then came the Askren fight. Fighters are professionals first and foremost, and stepping into that octagon is a requirement for each and every one of them in order to feed and support themselves and their family. However, for Jorge Masvidal, the opportunity to shut Ben Askren up once and for all was something that filled him with a quite frankly terrifying level of glee during fight week, as he promised to both Ben and all of us that the unbeaten wrestler would be next in line to be baptized. Of course, on the night itself, many were looking forward to this mid-tier main card matchup more than they were excited to see the pair of title fights that lay above it. And as the two made their walk to the octagon, there was an unmistakable tension in the air, something that made us feel as though we were about to see something special. We all know what happened next. Knee connected with face, and Ben Askren's unfortunate place in the annals of UFC highlight reel history was sealed in stone forever. The fastest knockout in the history of the UFC, and one of its most shocking fights to boot. Nate Diaz. And then came the battle for the BMF title, a matchup between two proven veterans who had each walked a long and arduous road towards the late career bursts in fame that had led them to a headlining gig at Madison Square Garden. Two of the most game fighters in the sport who, above all else, relished the prospect of a good scrap, and all things considered, we got our money's worth when the action got underway. Overall, it was the physicality and power of Jorge that seemed to be the biggest difference between the pair, as he dealt out some serious damage on the famously durable Diaz, before the fight was eventually stopped at the end of the third round by the doctors, calling it a TKO victory for Gamebred. Now, as the inaugural BMF champion and one of the most popular fighters in the sport, who knows exactly how far Jorge can go, and how many unfortunate opponents will end up getting baptized before all is said and done. I suppose only time will tell how far this resurrection can go. If you enjoyed today's content and would like to see more, be sure to leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel to keep up to date with all of our latest uploads. And as always, thank you for watching.